Chapter 4. A Marriage Ordained by God. After the encounter with the enemy's disguise, Adam and Eve understood something profound. Purity was not merely about avoiding sin, it was about waiting for God's timing. They knew that even the most sacred desires could be corrupted if pursued outside of His command, and so, according to the book of Adam and Eve, they entered into a season unlike anything they had known in Eden. A period of separation, prayer, and fasting before they would unite as husband and wife. The text records the number precisely, 223 days. That is over 7 months of restraint, discipline, and watchfulness. Day after day, Adam would rise at the first light and pray, asking for God's blessing to rest upon his future union. Eve, too, would keep her vigil, her prayers echoing against the walls of the cave of treasures. They would meet, speak briefly, share food gathered from the wilderness, and then retreat again to their separate places of prayer. This was not simply a test of self-control. It was a declaration that their covenant would not be founded on impulse, but on divine appointment. In Eden, marriage had been a gift given instantly. In exile, it had to be contended for, purified and prepared like an offering. At last, the day came when God spoke, confirming the time was right. Adam and Eve emerged from their season of preparation into the wilderness sun. The book describes the ceremony with symbolic precision. God himself brought forth 3 gifts: gold, myrrh, and frankincense. Gold, the emblem of kingship, foreshadowed the reign of the Messiah, who would come through their distant line. Myrrh, used for anointing and burial, foretold the suffering and sacrifice that would one day bring redemption. Frankincense, the fragrance of worship, pointed to restored communion between God and his people. These were not random offerings. They were prophetic signposts. Centuries later, wise men from the East would bring the same 3 gifts to the newborn Christ, sealing the connection between the first covenant of marriage and the ultimate covenant of salvation. But even this holy moment was not free from attack. The enemy, having failed with despair and failed with beauty, now sought to corrupt something sacred from within. The book says, Satan watched their union from a distance, whispering schemes into the air. Turn their covenant into a chain. Turn their love into hunger. Let them mistake desire for devotion. The implication is chilling. Marriage was not just a gift. It was the first battlefield of humanity. If the enemy could twist the purpose of this union, he could poison the foundation of family, legacy, and the future generations that God intended to raise in righteousness. Adam and Eve, however, had been forged in hardship. They guarded their vows as one guards a city under siege. They did not let physical desire overtake spiritual purpose. They built their life together not on fleeting passion, but on shared obedience. This is why Ethiopian tradition elevates their union as more than historical. It is prophetic. It tells us that every true covenant will be contested. Every God-ordained union will face storms designed to shift its center from God's will to human craving. And the moment a covenant's center shifts, the enemy gains ground. For Adam and Eve, the marriage covenant was not the end of temptation. It was the beginning of a deeper form of warfare. 2 lives bound together under God became a threat to the kingdom of darkness. And that threat would be met with new forms of assault in the years to come. But for now, their covenant stood. In the cave of treasures, they learned to love as warriors, not just as companions. And from that love, children would be born. Children whose stories would both carry promise and open the door to the first bloodshed in human history. Chapter 6. Seth and the Mountain of Holiness. After Abel's death and Cain's exile, a deep shadow hung over Adam and Eve's household. But into that sorrow, God gave another son, Seth, whose name means appointed. Eve herself said, God has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. The Book of Adam and Eve, alongside Ethiopian tradition, records that Seth was unlike his brothers. His countenance bore a quiet strength, and his heart leaned toward God from his earliest days. Adam, recognizing the calling on his son's life, set him apart. He was to be the keeper of the covenant, the guardian of the promise, the one who would preserve the line through which redemption would come. Under Adam's guidance, Seth and his descendants withdrew from the lowlands and ascended to the high places, a region later known as Mount Hermon. There the air was clean, the land untouched by Cain's bloodline, and the people devoted themselves to worship, purity, and the remembrance of God's command. From the heights, they could look down and see the fertile plains below, where Cain's descendants built cities, forged tools, and began to shape a culture apart from God. For generations, the sons of Seth remained on the mountain. They sang songs to the Creator, kept the sacred stories, and guarded themselves from the corruption below. The mountain became known as the Mountain of Holiness, a place set apart. But holiness is not preserved by location alone. It must be preserved in the heart. The Book of Adam and Eve warns that over time, the people on the mountain began to hear faint echoes from the valley, music unlike the worship they knew. At first it was curiosity. Then came the rumors of festivals, of dancing, of colors and sounds they had never seen. The descendants of Cain had mastered the craft of celebration, flutes and drums, ornaments of gold and silver. Garments dyed in brilliant colors. One by one, the young men of Seth's line began to descend, telling themselves they would only look, only listen. But beauty can be as dangerous as the serpent's tongue. In the valley, they saw the daughters of Cain, women of striking form and bold presence. Their laughter was intoxicating, their movements like spells. The sons of Seth did not return alone. They took wives from among them, crossing the line God had drawn between the holy and the profane. These unions were not merely cultural exchanges, they were spiritual fusions. The scriptures in the book of Enoch speak of this time as the doorway through which corruption flooded the earth. The offspring of these marriages became known as the Nephilim, giants of great strength, fierce in war, but violent and morally corrupt. They filled the land with bloodshed, arrogance, and rebellion against God. What began as a few steps down the mountain turned into a mass exodus. The mountain songs grew silent, its altars abandoned. Those who remained found themselves outnumbered and tempted. Slowly, the mountain of holiness became a memory rather than a dwelling place. It is here the prophetic lesson cuts deep. Holiness compromised, destruction inevitable. The sons of Seth did not fall in a single moment. It was the slow erosion of separation, the belief that they could mix devotion with disobedience and escape the consequences. The compromise did not only invite corruption, it invited exile of the heart. The altars on Hermon grew quiet. The songs of the high places were drowned by the drums of the lands. Names blurred, callings dimmed, and identity bled into the valley. When holiness is traded for applause, a people forgets who they are, and when a people forget who they are, someone else will name them. That is how exile begins, not first with chains on the wrists, but with amnesia in the soul. The question is no longer how tall are the giants, but who are we now? And that is where our investigation turns next, into the long shadow of exile that reaches from the children of Eden into every age that followed.